My name is Scott Leonard. I live in Washington, D.C., but I grew up in Wisconsin, and my Irish immigrant story doesn't have anything to do with the city of Philadelphia. It just happened to be where I could come today on the list of cities. So it's only a small part of my mother's family that were from Ireland, but when I began to study our family history 35 years ago, they were the most mysterious to me, and so I mostly wanted to study them when I could. I moved to Washington, where I was able to take advantage of the resources at the National Archives, including the Civil War records, and bit by bit, I was in the censuses, I was able to chip away and find the people. So basically, it's a married couple who were married in Toronto in 1854, each of them being immigrants from Ulster. Robert Emerson, who was from Fermanagh and had come with his family in 1847 at the height of the famine through Quebec and through Rosehill. And his wife, Anne Simpson, who was from County Tyrone. She came by herself, as far as I can tell, in 1852. Let me start with her because I know less about her, and it's easier to tell that part of the story such as I know it. Because Robert had some service in the Civil War, even though he was in his 40s of age by then, when he applied for an old age pension, and then when he died and she applied for a survivor's pension, they left behind a certain amount of records about their backgrounds. And she, at one point, accidentally said what village she was from in one of the letters many, many years later. She was from Caledon, which is a village in southern County Tyrone. In 2008, I was able to visit Northern Ireland and go to the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland and look at materials that aren't yet on the internet. And there still are a lot of things that aren't on the internet, so these trips are very important. Was able to find out not only the parish name and what book of records to look in, but also the exact townland. And on part of that trip, I was able to go out and visit the exact spot where they were from. They were tenant farmers living on an estate owned by the Earl of Caledon, which is a local estate there. I was able to find references to them paying rent in the Earl's books and that sort of thing. I know that she had a large family of siblings. They were all born in the late 1820s, right through the 1830s. I know nothing about what happened to them during the actual time of the famine. All I know is that she pops up in Toronto around 1852. Have never been able to find her on a ship's record, have never been able to find out what happened to the rest of her family, whether any of them died during the famine, whether any of them also emigrated, anything like that. So to her husband's family, Robert Emerson, I have learned a lot more about them, although I knew nothing about them on my trip 10 years ago. But in their case, this was a family that had parents, John Emerson and Isabella Armstrong. They lived in an area west of Enniskillen, which is a village I think is called Monea, M-O-N-E-A, in a townland. They were also renting. I found records where they were paying rent to an agent who worked for the local earl there. I have been able to find through writing to the Public Records Office some of their baptism records, the marriage record for the parents, this sort of thing, so I can tie them there. And also, miraculously, an extract from the 1841 census that names them, which I know that's a census that you don't find very many names left anymore, or entire records like that. So that was all good. In May of 1847, they inform the parish that they're leaving, this Church of Ireland parish, and they go to Derry and get on a ship called the Sesostris. They appear on the ship's manifest. So it's mother, father, 4 sons that range in age from, at that point in time, about 25 to 17, something like that. Not small children, but not old. None of them were married. None of them had families of their own yet. I have read everything I can about that voyage, and I've gone to Grosse Ile, and I've read books about, there are books that you can read about the day-to-day logs of the priests and who they buried, and ship's captain's logs, all these kinds of things that I can find. So they had a voyage that lasted 31 days from Derry to Grosse Ile. I believe that there was not a large number of deaths on the ship, but the mother, Isabella, did not survive the voyage, and I can't find any specific record of at what point in the voyage she died. But she's not in the ship's captain's records of people buried at sea, and there are some people buried at Grosse Ile from that ship who aren't named, and between that and some other things, I've concluded that maybe she's in the mass grave there, which I've gone to visit, and which is a very impressive place to visit. Eventually, their quarantine is lifted, and they're allowed to go to Quebec, and the father and the remaining sons. I believe they were headed to a specific destination when they left Ireland. There was a village called Moores, New York, Moores, just south of Montreal, just below the border, which in the 1840 and 50 census is full of people's names from their family, and that's where they end up in 1850, all except the eldest son, which is my ancestor Robert, who's gone off on his own to Toronto and gets married, as I said, that kind of thing. In the mid-1850s, then that family in Moores, the father and the 3 sons, a couple of whom are married by now, plus another family of the same name who'd already been there, at virtually the same moment moved to the frontier of Wisconsin, to a particular county, Waupaca, where the government has just begun opening it to settlement and giving people land grants, which is another reason why I think that there's some connection that goes back to Ireland there. Eventually the couple that I'm related to in Toronto, Robert and Anne, they hopscotch their way from Toronto, stopping a couple years at a time at different places, and then they also end up in Waupaca, near these other people who are farming. But Robert stays in town and works as a shoemaker the rest of his life. And they stay in Waupaca for a long, long time and become part of the community, and their children marry people from other ancestries and the way that you find in the United States, and so on down the line. Now, the father, John, by the time you get to the 1880s, he's quite old, but he's still alive. And 2 of the grown sons decide, for whatever reason, to not remain in Waupaca anymore, and they pick up and move and end up in Little Falls, Minnesota. And then some of their descendants end up back in Canada. And it's from the descendants of those people that once we got to the age of the internet and I was still doing my research, I began to find people that was related to them, where the stories about the famine and the mother dying on the voyage along the way and this sort of thing were preserved in those families in a way that it wasn't preserved in my branch of the family. And so to me personally anyway, it was really rewarding to make those connections through the internet with people in other parts of the U.S. and in Canada who we were all descended from this one family that came over at the one time.